Hey everyone, and welcome to Pagan Happy Hour. I hope you all have had a good week so far, and I am so happy to be sharing this topic with you all. I was really pleased that you picked the topic of ancestors on the poll I sent out yesterday. So, we are going to be diving into this topic. We will be discussing how to honor your ancestors, how to work with ancestors in your spiritual practice. We'll be going over different types of ancestors. We'll be discussing how to build an ancestor altar and what offerings to leave. We'll be talking about a few different holidays that are focused around honoring your ancestors. And if we still have time left, I thought I would take you on a guided meditation to meet an ancestral spirit. So that is the plan for today. And if you are new here, welcome. I do Pagan Happy Hour every Friday at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's just a great way for us fellow pagans and witches to connect. I really try to make this a two-way conversation. So I will be looking over here at your comments as we go along. I will be bringing in your thoughts and your ideas as much as possible. And there are two ways you can support Pagan Happy Hour if you enjoy the show. The first way is through my Patreon, which I have linked down below in my description box. And if you do choose to become a patron, you also gain access to my exclusive Discord community, which is another great place to share resources and chat with fellow pagans. And another great way you can support the show is through the Super Chats feature here on YouTube. It is the $ button at the bottom of the chat box. And through that, you can donate any amount, and your question or comment will pop up really big. So I'll be sure to see it and bring your thoughts and your ideas into the conversation. Now that we got that out of the way, I will cue that drink music, and I would love for you all to tell me where you are watching from tonight and what you are drinking. So let me cue that music. So today I am having a Saint Germain Royale, which is the cordial Saint Germain plus champagne. Feeling extra fancy today. Let's see where you all are tuning in from. We have people chiming in from Texas, from California, New York, Arizona, Germany, Kansas City, Wisconsin, Italy. Let's see, Virginia, Memphis, Pennsylvania, England, Michigan, New Hampshire, Wyoming, Indianapolis, Indiana. Let's see, we got Michigan, we got DC, Ohio, we have upstate New York, Saskatchewan, we have Colorado, Vermont, London, Connecticut, New Mexico, Louisiana, and the Big Apple. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. It means the world to me that you've chosen to spend an hour with me on your Friday. So let's jump into that topic. First, I'll have a sip here. Okay, let's jump into it. Okay, so let's talk about ancestors, which is a topic I haven't really talked too much about on my channel before. And there are a lot of different ways to approach this topic from a pagan perspective. I thought we would start by talking about a few different types of ancestors, because I think there are kind of different types here. The first type of ancestor is going to be the one that you're most familiar with. That is your blood relatives. So that's your deceased family members that you may have known in your lifetime, or at least have heard about or heard family members talking about. So those are your blood relative ancestors. But I also consider there to be kind of two other types that might be less talked about. The other type would be your ancestral ancestors. So these would be ancestors that are more generations back in time. They represent the place that your ancestors or your family maybe originally came from. So for many people around the world, this is going to be pretty simple because your ancestors probably, have been in the same country or area for multiple generations. For Americans, it gets a little trickier because many of us have ancestors that are not natively from the Americas, but are from different areas of the world. So, for example, my ancestors that are my kind of archetypal ancestors, I guess you could say, they are from Denmark, England, Ireland, and Scotland. So I kind of think of that as a whole separate category from your blood ancestors. So you have your blood ancestors, your archetypal ancestors, and then I also have a third category here that I'm calling the ancestors of the land. So that is where you are currently. So where you live right now, you may choose to honor the ancestors that have lived in that area. After all, they have done so much to make your life here meaningful and joyful. They probably planted trees in your neighborhood centuries ago, perhaps. So I think it can also be fun to honor the kind of land ancestors as well. So, those three types of ancestors are what we'll be talking about today. Though you could probably come up with more types too. This is just me sharing my own thoughts here. But let me check your comments and see if you all have any questions or thoughts about these different types of ancestors. Let's see. Okay, checking your comments here. Emily has an interesting comment. She says that the thought of working with blood ancestors is kind of off-putting as she's had too many bad experiences with family. Yeah, if you've had a rough family life, you don't have to work with blood ancestors. You could work with archetypal ancestors or ancestors of the land. So by no means do you have to work with your ancestors if you don't feel comfortable with that. Let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, checking your thoughts. Oh, Emmanuel has an interesting comment asking, what if my adoptive ancestors are Italian, but my blood ancestors are Romanian? In this case, I think you can honor both sets of ancestors. So if you're doing an ancestral altar, which we'll be talking about in a minute, you can incorporate items that tie to both those types. Let's see. Okay. Okay, let's see. And one last question here before moving on to the next point. Jessica is asking, what if my ancestors are not pagan? Which I'm sure for many of us, our blood ancestors are not pagan. That's awesome if they are for you. That would be really fun. But for me in particular, all my ancestors or my blood ancestors that I know of were Christian. Of course, if I'm looking at my archetypal ancestors, for that, I would be looking much further back to like the Norse people who were pagan and honoring them, or the ancient Celts. So you might want to think about it a bit in terms of if you have a blood relative that's passed on that would be extremely opposed to your pagan beliefs, maybe it's not the best idea to honor them with a pagan ancestral altar or to try to reach out to them through a spell or a ritual. So you don't want to dishonor ancestors. So if there are certain blood relations that would have kind of a big issue with what you're doing, you might want to kind of leave them out of your ancestral altar. But of course, this is all up to you and how you want to fit in ancestors into your own practice. Let's see. Oh, we have our first super chat from Shako Star Sun that says, I love this topic. Very glad it was picked. Oh, thank you so much for the super chat. I'm glad you are enjoying the episode so far. Let's see. Oh, and a good comment here from Uhtred, saying that all of us have pagan ancestors, but because before our Abrahamic ancestors, everyone was pagan, so it's impossible to avoid. Yes, so if you're looking at archetypal ancestors or the ancestors of the place that maybe your family or your clan originated way back when, they were pagan because at a certain point in time, everyone was pagan. So you can choose to just work with archetypal ancestors or land spirit ancestors and kind of leave blood ancestors out of it if you feel more comfortable doing that. Let's see. Oh, and another good comment here from B Nightfire saying, I love how the Japanese have ancestor altars in their homes and they honor them with offerings and drinks. There's not any religion to it, that they're just honoring the spirits. Yes, you'll find that in Eastern cultures, ancestor veneration is a much bigger part of everyday people's lives than it is here. Especially in America, we kind of approach our ancestors in the sense that we want to forge our own path and our own identity and kind of almost forget where we came from or our relatives. We try and leave the house at 18 and we go on our own way and we make it on our own. So our approach to ancestors is quite a bit different than many families who grow up in like China, Korea, or Japan, for example. So in general, when you're thinking about ancestors and honoring them, there are so many ways to do this. I think in general, just remembering your ancestors, especially if it's your blood ancestors, is a great way to honor them. So as you're going about your day, if you notice something that reminds you of someone who's passed on, just sitting with that memory can be a really great way to honor them. You can also learn about your ancestors. So, what were their lives like? What were they doing during their life? Did they go through challenges? So learning about your own family genealogy and what your ancestors' lives were like can be just a really simple way to honor them. Of course, there are also celebrations, celebrating their lives and their deeds in life. We'll be talking a bit about ancestral celebrations later on. And of course, participating in any ancestral cultural or religious events as a whole, which we'll get into in a bit. But next, I wanted to talk about how to create an ancestral altar. For me, this is one of my favorite ways to honor ancestors. So that's what we're going to get into. But let me check your comments and questions before we jump into that section. Let's see. Ooh, okay. Good question here that says, what about ancestors of the land you live on, but not related to your family or your ethnicity? So that's what I would consider the land spirit ancestors. So here I am in Savannah, Georgia. There are going to be people here that have lived on this land for a very, very, very long time, for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I'm not blood related to any of them. It's not tied to my ancestry in any way, but I could still choose to honor them. After all, in this neighborhood specifically, there are so many beautiful trees. If you've ever looked up Savannah, Georgia, the southern live oak is such a stunning tree. It's just dripping with the Spanish moss. So someone would have planted those trees. And perhaps I might want to honor the person who lived here, who planted all the trees that make this city so beautiful. So I could choose to honor them. And that would be a form of honoring the land spirit ancestors. So let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, a good comment that says, I consider researching ancestry to be a form of ancestor worship. Yeah, you can also consider that process of learning your ancestry, learning your genealogy to be part of honoring the ancestors in general. So this could also involve just talking to relatives that are still here, still alive. If you have a grandma or a grandpa or a great grandma, great grandpa, asking them about other people in the family tree or about their own lives. You kind of have a better understanding of your family tree as a whole. Let me see. Oh, and another good comment here that says, in my family, we start every ritual by inviting all blood ancestors to join our circle, regardless of any spiritual differences. The choice is theirs, but they always have a place if they want it. I love that approach. Like we were talking about earlier, for many of us, our blood ancestors would not be pagan. So that's a really kind of good way to offer them a place if they would like to join, but not to be too pushy. So I really like that. So next, I thought we would talk a bit about creating an ancestral altar. For me, this is one of the main ways that I work with ancestors, and I think it's a really good kind of introductory practice for working with your ancestors. So you may already have an altar that you have dedicated to certain pagan gods, for example. So this might be a separate space that is just designated for honoring your ancestors. Now, there's a couple things to consider if you are wanting to set one of these up. The first thing to consider is what type of ancestors will you be honoring with this altar? Is it going to be your blood relatives? Is it going to be your archetypal ancestors, your land spirit ancestors, or all three? So making that decision. And then you want to decide if this is going to be a temporary or a permanent altar space. Ooh, sorry for the light there. The sun is setting, so it's getting a little wonky. But yeah, so deciding if you want it to be a permanent space, where would be a good space for that, where it's not going to be, in someone's way, for example, in your home. Or for me, I tend to often do non-permanent ancestral altars for specific times of the year. Samhain is the main time where I will set up an altar, usually in late September, early October, and leave it there through all the way through Samhain. As an ancestral altar. So I kind of wait till that time of year before working on an ancestral altar. So you can use a number of different places for your altar. You could use the corner of a dresser. You could use your fireplace mantle. You could even choose a space outside if you like. You just want to make sure it's somewhere that isn't going to be too disturbed in your day-to-day going-ons. And then, when you're thinking about kind of setting up this space, there's a couple steps that can kind of help you go about it. The first thing I like to do is to physically cleanse my altar space. And for me, I often use temporary altars that I'm always changing up, especially I have 4 fireplace mantles that I'm always kind of playing around with. So I always start by physically cleaning the space and then energetically cleaning the space. There are many different ways to energetically clean a space. We've definitely gone over that in previous videos. Some, easy ways to do that through smudging or staining or incense smoke, through salt water, crystals, even moon water. So a lot of fun ways you can energetically cleanse a space. You can also choose to consecrate the space as well after it has been both physically and energetically cleansed. For example, to consecrate an ancestral altar, you might want to say, something like, I dedicate this space to my ancestors in hopes that their wisdom will guide me on my path. Something like that. You can write it out and then state your intention there for your consecration. Some people also like to consecrate an altar using the four elements. This is a more ritual magic approach that you see in a lot of Wiccan practices. This might look like, you're taking the four elements. So you have your air, and maybe you're using incense in this case, and you're, kind of moving the incense around the space clockwise 3 times, saying kind of, I consecrate this ancestral altar in the name of air. And then you do the same thing with the other elements. So, say for the south side of the altar, that would be fire. You can use a candle, and bring the candle around while saying, I consecrate this space. With the element of fire, and then you can use water. So that's an easy one, right? Just sprinkle a little water as you're going along. For the north, for earth, you can use salt. You can hold a plant. You can use a crystal. So you can also consecrate your ancestral altar using representations of the four elements as well. I have a whole pagan happy hour episode I did specifically about the four elements. So if you are interested in learning more about how that process works, I recommend checking out that episode. And then another thing you can do too before you place any objects on your altar is choosing an altar cloth. You definitely don't need an altar cloth, but it can be an extra fun touch. Traditionally, in a lot of Eastern ancestral altars, the altar cloth is red, as that color kind of represents prosperity and good luck and things like that. Though I think it would be really cool, and I personally haven't done this, but maybe I will if I get better at needlepoint later on. I think it'd be so cool to make your own altar cloth with your ancestral family tree. So actually either drawing it on a cloth, embroidering it, printing it on cloth. I just think it'd be so cool to have an ancestral altar that also with an altar cloth that shows your family tree. I don't know. Let me know if you've ever seen one of those done. I haven't really seen a photo of anyone doing this, but it would be a lot of work, but I love that idea. And next, let's get into what kind of objects you're going to place on your ancestral altar now that we've gone over all the steps of kind of getting it set up. But let me check your comments here before we jump into it. Oh, interesting question. Asking if there are special stones you could use for your ancestral altar. Yeah, that's kind of going into the topic of what items to put on your ancestral altar. And yeah, I think you could use, if you're working with land spirit ancestors, stones or crystals that are native to your area. If you're working with archetypal ancestors, it could be stones or crystals native to the region that your family originally came from. So yeah, lots of ideas there in terms of stones. Let's see. Oh, and a good comment from the G-Man mentioning that Walpurgisnacht is another time of year when the veil between the living and the deceased is thin, and that this is coming up on April 30th. Yes, Walpurgisnacht, which is around the same time of Beltane. Walpurgisnacht is kind of the Germanic version of the Witches' Night. I have talked about it before on my channel, but maybe we'll do a whole pagan happy hour at the end of the month all about Walpurgisnacht. And yes, any time of year where the veil is considered to be thin is a great time to be working with the ancestors, to be creating an ancestral altar in general. So, of course, Samhain is the quintessential one. That would be at the end of October. So, kind of our modern day Halloween is based on Celtic Samhain. But Beltane, on the other side of the wheel of the year, is also one of those times where the veil is extremely thin. So it kind of makes sense that our next big pagan holiday of Beltane or Walpurgisnacht coming up. Right now, we're kind of starting to think about ancestors, which is good because we can kind of set things up for later on this month. Let's see. Yeah, so let's talk a bit about what types of objects you could place on an ancestral altar. And in a lot of ways, this depends on what type of ancestors you are honoring. If you are honoring your blood ancestors, this is kind of a bit easy, right? Because you want to think about, well, do I have anything in my possession that deceased person owned, like a family heirloom? That would be a great item to place on an ancestral altar for your blood relatives. Also, photos, of course, of the deceased are another great thing to place. This set of glasses actually is from my late grandmother. So, for setting up a Samhain altar, I would probably place one of these glasses on the altar since it's a family heirloom. Another thing you can do too, and this only works if you if someone was buried with a tombstone, grave rubbings can be really neat to add to your ancestral altar. I think they're really cool in general. So, if you do have deceased relatives that have a gravestone, taking some paper and doing a grave rubbing, and then you can even frame it if you want, or just putting that artwork kind of on your ancestral altar can be really neat too. But yeah, so many neat things to put there. Really, just anything that reminds you of the deceased or anything that they might have owned that you now own are great items to put. One of the unusual items that you might have, which is a bit tricky to figure out if it's appropriate or not, is many families have a family Bible that has been passed down. I know I have one as well. And often these family Bibles have handwritten notes from members. They might even have a genealogy tree in the intro section of the family Bible. So, depending on how you feel about that, you could even put that on your ancestral altar. I don't personally, but often family Bibles are kind of full of ancestral information and like handwritten stuff, which is kind of neat, or even photos stuck in between pages in the book. Let me see in your comments here. I see Megan is mentioning she started adding family heirlooms to her altar. Let's see. I see another comment saying, I have a poetry book that my grandfather used to recite from. And yeah, that would be a great object to put on your ancestral altar. And a great way to honor him would be by reading one of those poems. So we talked a bit about blood ancestors. Now let's think about these archetypal ancestors or these ancestral ancestors. So this is a bit tricky, right? Because we don't know these people personally. They're not necessarily, in our genealogy because we might not be able to see that far back. But we know that roughly maybe our family originally came from this area. So taking an item that's representative of that area and putting that on your altar to honor those archetypal or ancestral ancestors. And you can do a number of different things. For example, if you are from Scotland, putting like a kilt pin on your altar. If you're from Ireland, maybe doing like a triple spiral. If you're from the Baltic region, maybe some amber, which is native or often kind of washed up on the shores of the Baltic. So there are so many things you could potentially put on your altar, just anything that connects to that original place based on your ancestry. And nowadays, especially for many Americans, it's become more interesting because many of us have been able to take those genetic tests so we can actually figure out what specific region your ancient ancestors might have been from. So just looking at that region, that area, and thinking what item would represent that country, that place, and putting that on your ancestral altar. Especially too, some people might even have items that are a bit of both. For me, my great grandmother came from Copenhagen, Denmark. So I have a few items that are actually from her. So it's an example of both a archetypal ancestor and a blood relation. So I have a storybook in Danish that's from her. I have a pin. So those items I would place on an ancestral altar. Now, the last kind of subset of ancestors, the land spirit ancestors, that's where you want to actually look at the land around you for items to put on your altar. If there is a plant or herb that is native to your region that's been cultivated here for a long time, that would be a good item to place on your altar. If there is a type of stone or crystal that is native to your region, that could be a good thing to place. So really kind of foraging for something natural, I think, can be a really great item to put on your ancestral altar to honor those land spirit ancestors. So let me see what you guys have to say here. Oh, interesting question from Roy. He asks, is there anyone here who could give me an idea on why it's important to do ancestor altars and rituals? Good question. So, why is any of this important in the first place? So, I think there actually is a lot of ancestral wisdom that has been lost over time. For example, if we look at the Druids, the Celts, right? The Druids did not write anything down. They passed their knowledge through the oral system just by telling stories, sharing their knowledge, memorizing that knowledge, and then passing it on to the next generation. Eventually, people stopped honoring their ancestors or stopped caring enough, and that information was lost. Of course, the Christianization of the area had a lot to do with that as well. But imagine what we might know now today if that knowledge had not been lost, if that ancestral wisdom was passed down through the ages. So you can kind of think of that in modern day terms, especially in contemporary society. I think I often notice how much ancestral wisdom I personally am lacking. For example, my grandmother or great grandmother had a lot of different skills that I did not learn. Some skills like how to sew, how to can, how to garden, all of these different things that was ancestral knowledge and had been passed down from mother to daughter, and then it kind of ended. And I didn't get any of that. So now, as an adult, I am trying to learn all of that. But it would have been really nice if some of that ancestral wisdom had been passed down. So, one of the reasons I think we can value our ancestors is because there actually is a lot of wisdom there that we might miss out on if we just look towards the present and the future. Honoring our ancestors is a way to focus a bit on the past and take the best aspects of the past and bring them into the present. Of course, we don't want to do everything like they did back then. There was a lot of bad stuff too, of course. But imagine a world where that information had been passed down and was still passed down today, and how different things might be. So it's kind of a long kind of discussion or a topic or idea on why any of this is important. And this is just my own 2 cents. But I do think there is some kind of inherent value in the knowledge of our ancestors or honoring our ancestors. I do think they have something to offer that we might be missing in modern day society. Let's see. Oh, we have a super chat from Teresa. Thank you so much. That says, I am not particularly close to my family and don't have children, and that I feel a bit removed from ancestry work. Anyone else in a similar situation? Um, yeah, I know what you mean there. I don't know that much about my blood relative ancestors, and I don't have children, and I probably won't have children. So it is a bit tricky, but I do personally tend to focus then more on the archetypal ancestors and the land spirit ancestors. So I mostly work with them and occasionally work with my blood ancestors, but I don't have that much information there. I'm working on it. I'm learning more. Um, yeah, so that's a great question. I think there are a lot of people in that similar situation, which is why I think it's great that there are kind of multiple forms of ancestors that you could choose to work with. Emily says that land spirit ancestors sounds interesting. I live in central Illinois and little is known about the original tribes here. The mounds and the graves feel pretty powerful though. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I actually went to college in Wisconsin where there were a lot of the Native American mounds all throughout the college campus. This was Beloit College, if you're curious. And yeah, people didn't know that much about those mounds and why they were there. So it gets a bit tricky when you're thinking about how do I honor the land spirit ancestors when you don't even know that much about the people who kind of were originally there. So I think just kind of learning as much as we can and honoring them through what we can find in our natural environment can be good. Just kind of being open to any wisdom or knowledge they might want to impart. Let's see. Okay. So another thing too that I wanted to mention is offerings. And offerings are a big part of paganism. I've done many videos, I've done many pagan happy hours all about leaving offerings. And this is kind of something that really kind of sets paganism apart from many Abrahamic religions. Offerings, I think, are pretty key to a contemporary pagan practice. So, what types of offerings would you leave for the ancestors? And again, I think this is different depending on what type of ancestors you are working with. For example, if it is your blood relatives, and if you happen to have known them during their life, this can be pretty easy. I like to leave an offering of something that they really liked to eat or drink during their life. So, for example, every Samhain, I set up my Samhain altar, which is also a bit of an ancestral altar. On my altar, I have a photo of my father that passed away a few years ago, and I always have a glass of whiskey because a whiskey was his favorite drink. So that whiskey is the offering. So think about if there are any specific blood relatives you want to honor through your ancestral altar. What did they enjoy eating or drinking in their life? That would be the perfect offering. Now, when it comes to food offerings, obviously you don't want to just kind of leave it to rot on your fireplace mantle, right? That could get pretty gross. So if you're wondering on how I dispose of food and drink offerings, I usually will just leave them for a day, maybe two. If it's like alcohol or something that doesn't kind of go bad, I might leave it a little bit longer. And then I just take it outside, pour it, if it's a drink libation, into the ground, or bury it or leave it out for the animals in my yard to eat. So that's kind of just something easy you can do for a blood relation. If it's an ancestral altar, that can be a bit trickier, but you can kind of do the same thing. So, for example, look at what country, nation your archetypal ancestors originally came from. Pick a item from that region as your offering. So, like a food or drink item from that area would be really good. Also, incense works too if you don't want to do a food or drink item, and especially if you can use incense that incorporates herbs from that region or plants that are native to that region. That would work really well as well. And then for land spirit ancestors, look at what is made locally where you live. If you have a local farmers market where someone is offering food items that have been there for a while, that could be a great thing to put on your altar. You could forage for any items from ancient trees, in your area. Do you have any acorns? Do you have any chestnuts or whatever in your local area, and placing that as an offering for the land spirit? So really looking at what is local and native to where you live. Here in Savannah, we're particularly known for honey. So leaving honey as an offering would be something I might do for honoring the land spirit ancestors. So that's kind of just a rough sketch on how you could create a ancestral altar. What are the steps for creating that altar in terms of cleansing, consecrating, what objects to put, what offerings to give. So next, I want to talk a bit about a few different holidays and rituals. But let me know if you have any questions about the ancestral altar and setting it up. Let's see. I see Megan in the comments says that snacks and wine make a frequent appearance on my ancestor altar. That sounds great. Oh, we have a super chat from Sarah Sweeney. Thank you so much. Cheers. I'm glad you're enjoying the episode today. Let's see. Oh, interesting. And she has a great comment that says about local land spirit ancestors that you can email the local historical society and ask them specific questions about the land. Yeah, I think that's a great point. So researching your area can actually be a wonderful way to honor your local land spirit ancestors. So next, let's talk just briefly about different holidays, because there are many holidays around the world that do specifically honor the ancestors. For us pagans, especially those that might work within a Celtic context, Samhain is probably going to be your main time of the year to work with ancestors. There are many aspects of ancestor veneration that goes along with Samhain. This is when I personally set up my ancestral altar. This is also when I tend to do a big Samhain meal and to leave a place setting for the ancestors. So that itself is kind of an offering for the ancestors, leaving a spot at the table for them to come in and enjoy the meal. If you follow Wicca, you might have heard the phrase dumb supper. In this case, dumb doesn't mean idiotic, it means silent. And some witches following the Wiccan path tend to have this Samhain meal in complete silence. I tend to not do that. I like to talk while I eat. But that's definitely an option. But I do really enjoy the concept of leaving a place setting for the deceased to join you at your Samhain feast. There are, of course, ancestral celebrations around the world. Dia de los Muertos in Mexico is, of course, one of the most famous, where people usually will have an ancestral altar and they will also go to the cemetery to have a meal with their ancestors. In the Eastern world, in China, Japan, and Korea, they do a lot more ancestor veneration and honoring than we do here. There are also specific holidays like Oban in Japan or Chuseok in South Korea that do have an aspect of honoring the ancestors to them. So really throughout the whole world, there are many variations, of taking a time of the year to focus on your past, to focus on your ancestors, and to honor them. Interestingly, in America, we don't have anything really like that in modern day society, and we would probably benefit from having something like that in our own modern day culture. So I see someone mentioning in the comments that All Souls Day would be another time for this. Yes, definitely. All Souls Day is kind of the Christian version of Samhain. It occurs right after Samhain. So yeah, so many good thoughts here in the comments. Oh, I see that Warner in the comments is mentioning that in Finnish paganism, there is a holiday where you warm up in a sauna and cook food for the deceased that would visit the house. I love that idea. The Finns are, of course, very fond of their saunas. And yeah, so now that we've kind of discussed different types of ancestors, we've discussed the whole idea of setting up an ancestral altar and leaving offerings for the ancestors. We have about 15 minutes left, and I thought I would try something new for this pagan happy hour. So we'll see how it goes. But another fun thing you can do or try is a guided meditation to connect with your ancestors. So this could be your blood ancestors, your archetypal ancestors, or your land spirit ancestors. So I thought it would be kind of fun to take you all watching through a guided meditation. So we're going to do that. I'm going to put some music on here. And I would like you all to get cozy and comfortable for our last few minutes of Pagan Happy Hour. And I think we can go on a guided meditation together. So the purpose of this meditation is to meet one of your ancestors. It could be any of those three types of ancestors, and to get some piece of guidance or wisdom from them. So get cozy. Take one last sip of your drink. And next, I want you to relax your body. You're going to follow the sound of my voice as I count down from 13. Ready? 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Your eyes should be closed. Your body is relaxed. And inside your mind, picture a giant tree, bigger than any tree you have seen before. This is the world tree, a gateway between worlds. Imagine your mind like a doorway, a portal you can easily pass through. Step through the portal and stand before the great tree. Hear the wind in its branches. Smell the earth where the roots dig in, and reach out and feel the bark. As you keep your hands on the bark, hold the intention of finding an ancestor spirit who can help guide you on your path. Next, search in the roots of the tree for an opening. When you find it, step into the opening. This will lead to a tunnel. The tunnel slopes gently downward. I want you to follow that tunnel downward. Continue to follow the tunnel as it spirals ever more down. Towards the end of the tunnel, you see a light. It's flickering like a fire. Walk towards the light. The tunnel ends in a forest clearing. There is a great fire in the middle of this clearing, and around the fire are the spirits of the ancestors. The ancestors are dancing or simply just watching the flames of the fire. Wait on the edge of the clearing until one of the ancestors breaks away and comes to join you. This may be a recent ancestor, someone you knew in life, or it may be someone from a more distant past. It may be an ancestor of blood or an ancestor of spirit. If you do not recognize the ancestor, you should introduce yourself. Ask your ancestor guide for any wisdom or guidance that can help you in your life path. What is your task in these times? What wisdom from older times might help you in your work? What else do you need in order to accomplish your goals? Ask any questions you might have. The ancestor may give you a gift to help you in your work, or to help you remember this conversation. Search within yourself to see if you have a gift to offer in return. After you have received this gift from your ancestor, thank them for their help and wisdom. This gift might be a symbol, it might be a word, it might be an image. Take that with you as you find the tunnel once again. And you enter it and follow it as it slopes back upward. You follow the tunnel up and up. You follow it until you are once again at the base of the great world tree. Hold your hands to the bark of the tree and offer thanks for facilitating this journey. Then, step back through the screen of your mind and bring yourself back to this circle. Come back to this time and this place, and open your eyes. So, I hope you enjoyed that little guided meditation. That was a fun experiment, right? You should have your eyes open now. You should have completed your meditation. This was, of course, a shortened version. And I did get this specific meditation from a blog post on Pathos by Erica Barron. I have it linked down below if you would like to check that out. I would love for you all in the comments to share if you want to. You, of course, don't have to. Did you receive any gift from your ancestors during that meditation? Did you receive an image or a symbol or an idea that came to mind during that conversation? I would love, as a fan of symbolism, to know what that might have been. So yeah, definitely let me know in the comments what you thought of that. I see Teresa mentioning that she received a mason jar from her great grandma during the meditation. That sounds lovely. I see someone mentioning that they received a key from their great grandfather. Ooh, that sounds neat. I see someone else received a spoon and that they gave a dove pendant. Wow, it seems some of you guys really enjoyed it and kind of felt the emotion of that journey. Um, yeah, I'm really glad you did. This was something I wanted to try, kind of bringing a bit more of a interactive ritual component to Pagan Happy Hour. Let me know if you do like that idea or not, if I should bring in more ritual elements to Pagan Happy Hour as a whole. I know my patrons recently, we were having a chat and they were mentioning how they would like to try more stuff like that. So I do hope you enjoyed it. And we do have just a couple minutes left. If you did enjoy this guided meditation, if you do enjoy Pagan Happy Hour, now would be a wonderful time to do a super chat to help support the show, to give me any of your questions, any of your thoughts. I'm going to check the comments here in our last few moments and see what you all have to say. I see that in the comments, Wednesday Robinson says that really loved doing the guided meditation. Great to hear that. I see several of you all mentioning that you would love more ritual elements to Pagan Happy Hour. So that is good to hear. A good question here from Graves mentioning, if you believe in reincarnation, isn't there a risk of bothering ancestors who have moved on? Perhaps, but I don't view it too much as bothering them. I think of it more as us honoring them. So even if they moved on, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Let's see. Jen is mentioning that the Discord group, which is for my patrons, is conjuring up a little ritual for Beltane coming up. Beltane is, of course, one of the big pagan holidays. I'm really looking forward to Beltane myself this year. So it seems really great that so many of you all enjoyed that little guided meditation piece at the end of Pagan Happy Hour. I'm really glad you enjoyed that and got something out of it, got something meaningful. And I want to thank you all so much for choosing to join me this Friday. I really appreciate all your support. And I want to sign off and wish you all the best. And I will see you next week. Thank you guys so much. Talk to you later. Bye.